Picture a world where every breath you take carries a whisper of the divine. The air is thick with the scent of sacred lotus blossoms, the sweet aroma of honey, and the rich, earthy fragrance of myrrh. But these are not ordinary perfumes meant to simply mask an unpleasant odor or add a touch of luxury to daily life. In ancient Egypt, scent was a pathway to the gods, a medium for prayer, and a tool for eternal life. Perfume makers were not just artisans, they were high priests of fragrance, blending flowers, resins, and spices into potions that could open the doors to heaven, protect the soul in the afterlife, and even communicate with deities who shaped the universe. This was a world where aroma held power far beyond the senses, and every drop of perfume was a sacred key to the unseen. Today, we often think of perfume as a personal luxury, something we spritz on before an evening out or receive as a gift. But the ancient Egyptians understood fragrance on an entirely different level, one woven into the very fabric of their spirituality, identity, and understanding of existence. Their secrets of perfume making were among the most closely guarded arts of one of history's greatest civilizations, passed down through generations of skilled practitioners who worked in temple workshops shadowed by obelisks and guarded by stone gods. These master creators used ingredients sourced from the farthest reaches of the known world: frankincense from the land of Punt, cinnamon from exotic eastern trade routes, and precious blue lotus flowers harvested under the Egyptian sun, all to produce scents that were believed to carry the prayers of mortals to the ears of immortals. What if I told you that these ancient blends still influence the perfumes we wear today, or that the methods they used, some lost for millennia, are now being rediscovered, offering us a glimpse into a culture that saw scent as both science and soul? In this video, we're going to explore one of history's most fascinating and overlooked art forms, Egyptian perfume making. Together, we'll uncover how these sacred fragrances were crafted, why they meant so much more than just a pleasant smell, and what they can teach us about the human desire to connect with something greater than ourselves. This is a journey into the heart of an ancient mystery, and by the end, you'll never think about perfume the same way again. To truly grasp the power of perfume in ancient Egypt, you have to understand that the line between the physical and spiritual worlds was incredibly thin. The air itself was not empty space, it was a living thing, a conduit for the divine. When priests burned aromatic resins in a temple censer, they weren't just creating a pleasant smell. They believed they were generating a physical manifestation of Heka, the magical force that underpins all of creation. This fragrant smoke was a direct signal to the gods, a way of saying, "We are here and we are listening." This belief made the temple workshop, or the perfumery, a place of profound sanctity. Here, the priests, who were also the master perfumers, operated under strict ritual purity. They would undergo ceremonial washing, wear specific linen garments, and recite incantations as they worked. The act of blending was itself a form of worship. Each ingredient was chosen not only for its scent, but for its spiritual symbolism. The blue lotus, which opens each morning with the rising sun, was sacred to the sun god Ra. Myrrh, with its preservative qualities and deep, somber aroma, was associated with death, rebirth, and the god Osiris. To mix these elements was to weave together the fundamental stories of their mythology, creating a liquid prayer. Nowhere was this sacred function more critical than in the process of mummification. The body was not just being preserved for its own sake, it was being transformed into a perfect, eternal vessel for the soul. Perfumes and unguents played a starring role in this sacred drama. The embalmers would anoint the body with vast quantities of precious oils, cedar oil, palm wine, and spices like cinnamon and frankincense. These weren't merely antiseptics or deodorizers. Each application was a ritual act, meant to purify the deceased and make them fragrant and acceptable to the gods they would meet in the afterlife. The most famous example is the sacred Antiou oil, a legendary blend whose exact recipe is lost to time, but which was central to the opening of the mouth ceremony, the ritual that restored the senses to the mummy so the deceased could see, hear, taste, and smell in the next world. Beyond the temples and tombs, scent was a daily offering to the gods. statues of deities in their inner sanctuaries were treated as if they were living beings. Each morning, priests would wash, dress, and anoint these divine statues with the finest perfumes. This was an intimate act of devotion, a way of caring for a god and keeping them content and present within the community. To offer a deity a beautiful fragrance was to offer them a piece of the divine order itself, a gesture of respect they could literally inhale. This practice elevated perfume from a simple substance to a form of communion, a direct sensory link between humanity and the divine, making every bottle a potential vessel for the sacred. This deep spiritual connection between fragrance and faith is powerfully embodied in the Egyptian gods themselves. Think of it this way: if a scent was a prayer, then the deity it was dedicated to was its intended recipient. Among the pantheon, a few gods were so intimately linked with perfume that they were thought to be the very essence of the aromas they represented. Chief among these divine perfumers was Nefertem, a god often depicted as a beautiful young man emerging from a blue lotus blossom, sometimes with a lavish headdress of lotus flowers and two plumes. He wasn't just a minor deity, he was the god of the first sunrise, of healing, and most significantly, the lord of perfume. Ancient texts even call him the lotus bloom at the nose of Ra, visualizing him as the exquisite fragrance that the sun god inhaled each morning at the moment of creation, filling the world with life and order. Nefertem represented the perfect, primal scent, pure, divine, and possessing the power to heal both the body and the spirit. When Egyptian priests anointed statues or the sick with lotus-scented unguents, they were invoking Nefertem's healing, rejuvenating presence. Then, there is the feline goddess Bastet, whose association with perfume might seem surprising at first. Known as a protective deity who could also embody fierce wrath, her softer side was intimately connected to the arts of pleasure, love, and fragrance. Her sacred city, Bastet, was famous for its lavish festivals, where devotees would celebrate with music, dance, and an abundance of perfumed ointment. Worshippers would offer tiny decorative pots filled with perfumed grease to her temples, a direct request for her blessings of protection and grace. The most common way to depict Bastet was as a cat, an animal the Egyptians observed to be fastidiously clean and captivated by the scent of certain plants like catnip. This connection made her a natural patron of the precious oils and unguents used in daily life for adornment and celebration. But perhaps no deity was more synonymous with the power of scent than Hathor, the goddess of love, beauty, music, and drunken ecstasy. Her very title translates to House of Horus, but she was also known as the Lady of Fragrance. Rituals in her honor were sensory spectacles involving the shaking of sistrum rattles, dancing, and the offering of myrrh. It was believed that the sweet smoke of burning incense was not just pleasing to Hathor, it was her physical manifestation. The sacred menat necklaces shaken in her rites were often made of faience beads designed to resemble discs of fragrant resin. To be in a state of fragrance was to be in the presence of Hathor herself, to be filled with her joyful and intoxicating energy. This made perfume an essential tool for invoking her favor in matters of the heart and in celebrating the sheer joy of being alive. Deep within the gilded halls of the royal palace, far from the public temples, lay the heart of secular scent, the pharaoh's private perfume workshop. This was not merely a room for mixing oils, it was a heavily guarded laboratory of luxury, where air itself was woven into a symbol of power. Access was a privilege granted to a select few, and the master perfumers who worked there were more than artisans, they were sworn guardians of state secrets, living their lives within the palace walls under a vow of silence that was as unbreakable as the stone that surrounded them. The security surrounding these chambers was immense. They were typically located in a secluded wing, with entry controlled by trusted royal guards. There are accounts, though scarce, suggesting that some perfumers were even kept within the palace, confined permanently to prevent the formulas from ever leaving. The recipes themselves were never written down on papyrus scrolls that could be stolen or copied. Instead, they were committed to memory, passed verbally from a senior master to a single, chosen apprentice only after years of rigorous testing and proven loyalty. A single leaked formula for a pharaoh's signature scent would be considered an act of treason, a theft of the royal aura itself. What were they protecting with such extreme measures? They were safeguarding the very essence of the king's identity and authority. A pharaoh did not wear a scent simply to smell pleasant. He and his royal court wore a carefully crafted olfactory banner. Each ruler often had a signature blend, a unique fragrance that became synonymous with their presence. When the pharaoh entered a room, his scent announced him before he even spoke. It was a non-verbal proclamation of power, health, and divine favor. The famous Pharaoh Hatshepsut, for instance, was known for commissioning expeditions to the fabled land of Punt, primarily to secure exotic myrrh trees so that her signature fragrance could be produced from a source she alone controlled. These royal perfumes were also diplomatic tools of the highest order. Jars of the finest palace-produced oils were among the most prestigious gifts that could be given to a foreign dignitary or an allied king. To receive a vase of the pharaoh's own perfume was to be granted a tactile piece of his grace and power. It was a gesture that said, "You are worthy of sharing in the essence of Egypt itself." This turned perfume into a currency of diplomacy, more valuable than gold in certain negotiations, because it carried the intangible weight of prestige and personal connection. The work of these hidden palace perfumers thus extended far beyond vanity. They were silent architects of political alliances and the creators of a sensory dynasty that defined an era. Of all the sacred perfumes crafted in the temple workshops, one blend stood above the rest, shrouded in such mystery that its true scent remains an enigma to this day, Kaifai. This was not a perfume for the living to wear, but an aromatic offering of such power and complexity that it was believed to please the gods themselves. Its recipe was a closely guarded secret, but one remarkable inscription carved into the walls of the Temple of Edfu gives us a glimpse into its divine composition. It lists 16 exquisite ingredients, each chosen for its spiritual resonance as much as its aroma. Imagine the perfumers gathering dried raisins and wine to provide a sweet, fermented base note, adding the sharp, clean scent of juniper berries and the pine-like aroma of turpentine resin. They would include the calming, earthy fragrance of camel grass, the exotic sweetness of cinnamon, and the precious, honeyed aroma of myrrh. This was a symphony in a bowl, a complex harmony of botanicals meant to be burned at the most sacred time of day, dusk. The ritual of preparing and burning kaifai was a profound ceremonial act. It was never used in the bright light of day, but exclusively as the sun dipped below the horizon during the liminal hour when the world of the living and the world of the gods were believed to be closest. Priests would mix the ground ingredients with wine and honey, forming them into small pellets or cones. As twilight descended, these would be placed on hot coals in a temple censer. The smoke that rose was thick, sweet, and ricinous, a sensory embodiment of the evening itself. This wasn't just a pleasant air freshener for the temple, it was a spiritual tool. The Egyptians believed the smoke carried their prayers directly upward, that the gods inhaled this sacred aroma and were thereby nourished and pleased. It was also thought to purify the temple space, induce peaceful dreams, and even act as a kind of medicinal incense, soothing the lungs and calming the mind of anyone who breathed it in. For modern perfumers and historians, kaifai represents the ultimate challenge, a holy grail of historical fragrance. The Edfu inscription gives us the ingredients, but like an ancient culinary recipe, it lacks the precise measurements, the exact preparation methods, and the specific types of each plant. Was the wine red or white? Which species of juniper was used? How long was each ingredient dried or cured? These unanswered questions have launched a fascinating quest for recreation. Several renowned perfume houses and dedicated Egyptologists have attempted to reverse engineer kaifai based on the Edfu list. Each attempt produces a vastly different scent profile. Some versions are sweet and wine-like, others are dry and woody, and others still are deeply ricinous and smoky. None can be definitively called the true kaifai because we lack the one thing that made it work. The ancient Egyptian nose, trained from birth to understand scent not just as a chemical compound, but as a theological language. The mystery of kaifai endures because it is more than a lost perfume. It is a lost way of perceiving the world, where every aroma was a word and every puff of smoke was a sentence in an ongoing conversation with the divine. Within the cool, stone confines of the temple, the air itself was a carefully orchestrated medium for communication with the divine. The burning of incense was not a simple task delegated to a junior acolyte. It was a high ritual, performed with meticulous precision by the high priest himself. The ceremony was governed by a sacred schedule, aligning the fragrance with the celestial movements of the gods. At dawn, as the first rays of the sun god Ra illuminated the horizon, the temple would be filled with the bright, awakening scent of frankincense. Its clean, citrus and pine aroma was seen as a mirror to the newborn sun, a fragrant offering to energize the god and welcome his daily journey across the sky. As the day progressed into the intense heat of the afternoon, the rituals would shift. The rich somber and slightly medicinal scent of myrrh might be offered to a god like Osiris, ruler of the underworld, whose domain was associated with the restorative powers of death and rebirth. The choice of scent was a language, each resin and gum speaking directly to a specific deity's nature and domain. The timing was everything. The most profound ceremonies were reserved for the twilight hours, that magical threshold between day and night when the veil between worlds was believed to be at its thinnest. It was then that the most complex and revered incense, like the legendary Kai-Fi, would be prepared and burned, its multi-layered smoke serving as a bridge for spirits to cross. The act of offering was a physical prayer. The priest would approach the altar, often a bronze or gold censer held in one hand, with a sacred vessel of water in the other. He would first purify the space with a sprinkle of water, then place the granules of resin onto the hot charcoal. As the fragrant smoke began to coil upwards, he would recite specific incantations, calling upon the god to receive the sweet breath of life. This wasn't a metaphor. The Egyptians believed the deities literally sustained themselves on this aromatic smoke. It was their divine food, their nourishment. The rising plume was not just a symbol of a prayer traveling to the heavens. It was the very vehicle for the prayer itself, a tangible, scented message inhaled by the gods. To stand in a temple during these rituals was to be immersed in a cloud of devotion, where every breath was shared between mortal and immortal, binding them together in a fragrant, silent conversation. While the temple perfumers crafted scents for the gods and the palace artisans blended for the living, a third, even more specialized group operated in the shadowy realm between, the necropolis perfumers. These were the unsung masters of eternity, the chemists of the afterlife whose workshop was not a sunlit temple but the embalmer's tent, set deliberately apart from the bustling city on the west bank of the Nile, the domain of the dead. Their task was singular and monumental, to create the sacred unguents and resins that would transform a decaying body into an incorruptible, fragrant vessel, ready for its eternal journey. The tools of their trade were as unique as their purpose. Archaeologists have uncovered what they call embalmers' caches, collections of pottery vessels, often found buried near royal tombs, that still bear the residue of the substances they once held. Analysis of these residues reveals a sophisticated pharmacopoeia of preservation and perfume. They worked with huge quantities of materials, imported cedar oil, which possesses natural insect-repelling and antibacterial properties, thick, sticky palm wine, used as a cleansing agent, and the most precious resins like frankincense and myrrh, which not only smelled divine but also acted as powerful antimicrobials, halting decomposition in its track. Their workshop would have been filled with the scent of boiling fats, melting resins, and steeping herbs, a strange and powerful aroma that spoke not of death, but of life preserved. Their most sacred duty was the application of these substances during the 70-day ritual, the meticulous process of mummification. This was not a hurried affair, but a carefully staged spiritual operation, and the necropolis perfumers provided the materia magica for each critical phase. After the internal organs were removed and the body dried with natron salt, the perfumers would anoint the skin with these precious oils, restoring its suppleness and imbuing it with a holy fragrance. The body cavities were often packed with linen bags filled with aromatic sawdust and myrrh, a final effort to perfume the vessel from the inside out. Each application was accompanied by specific prayers, turning a chemical process into a transcendent ritual. The ultimate expression of their art was the creation of the 7 sacred oils, each with a specific name, purpose, and point of application on the mummy's body. These weren't generic lotions. Each oil had a mystical function. One, like the famed Hekanu oil, was for anointing the head to grant wisdom in the afterlife. Another, Seftek, was for the limbs, ensuring strength and mobility. The final and most crucial ritual was the opening of the mouth, where a priest would touch the mummy's mouth with an ad-shaped tool anointed with a special oil, magically restoring the deceased's ability to speak, eat, and breathe in the next world. In this moment, the work of the necropolis perfumer reached its apex. Their carefully crafted unguent became the key that unlocked eternity, proving that in ancient Egypt, the path to immortality was not just carved in stone, but was also sealed in scent. But of all the rare and sacred botanicals that crossed the perfumer's workbench, one stood apart for its intoxicating beauty, its astronomical cost, and its otherworldly power, the legendary blue lotus. Known to science as Nymphea caerulea, this was not merely a flower. To the ancient Egyptians, the lotus was a living embodiment of the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Each evening, it would submerge beneath the water's surface, and each morning, it would emerge again, pristine and reborn with the rising sun. This daily miracle made it a potent symbol of the sun god Ra and of creation itself. But its value went far beyond the symbolic. The blue lotus was the champagne of ancient perfumery, an ingredient of such exquisite luxury and potent effect that its scent was considered the very breath of the gods. The process of capturing its fragrance was an exercise in patience and extravagance. Harvesting was a precise art. The flowers had to be gathered by hand at the precise moment of dawn, just as they opened to greet the sun, believed to be when their aromatic oils were at their peak potency. But the true extravagance lay in the extraction method, a technique known as enfleurage. Because the delicate lotus petals would be destroyed by direct heat, perfumers employed a cold, fat-based method. They would painstakingly press each individual petal into a layer of purified, odorless animal fat spread across a flat wooden or stone slab. Over days, the fat would slowly absorb the flower's essential oil. The wilted petals would be replaced with fresh ones again and again, sometimes for weeks on end, until the fat was utterly saturated with the profound, sweet, and slightly spicy floral aroma. This precious, lotus-infused unguent, known as a pomade, could then be used as is or have its scent washed out into alcohol. The amount of labor and raw material required was staggering. It could take tens of thousands of hand-picked blossoms to produce just a single vial of the purest essence, making it a fragrance reserved for royalty and the most elite temple ritual. Yet its use extended beyond the sacred and into the deeply personal realm of romance and seduction. The blue lotus was believed to be a powerful aphrodisiac. Its scent was not just alluring, it was thought to actively inspire desire and lower inhibitions. We see this depicted in art and literature, where lovers are often shown exchanging or inhaling the lotus blossom at feasts and intimate gatherings. But this effect may have been more than just superstition. Modern analysis suggests the blue lotus contains mild psychoactive compounds, apomorphine and nuciferine, which can produce feelings of euphoria and relaxation. While not a strong hallucinogen, its effects would have been noticeable a gentle, blissful elevation of the senses that made the world seem more vibrant, music more enchanting, and attraction more intense. To wear a perfume of blue lotus was to anoint oneself with the essence of pleasure itself, to become a living embodiment of the goddess Hathor's intoxicating grace. It was the ultimate sensory luxury, a fragrance that promised not just to make you smell divine, but to momentarily feel that way too. The precious ingredients that filled the temple censers and royal perfume cabinets did not simply appear by magic. They were the hard-won prizes of some of the most perilous expeditions ever undertaken in the ancient world. Venturing into the blistering heat of the eastern desert and the distant, unforgiving lands of Nubia and Punt, teams of specialized resin hunters risked everything to bring back the sacred tears of the frankincense and retreat. These were not casual foraging trips. They were state-sponsored missions, massive logistical operations that combined the courage of exploration with the precision of a military campaign. The journey to the land of Punt, the fabled source of the finest myrrh, was especially legendary. We know of these trips from the magnificent reliefs carved into the walls of Pharaoh Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. They depict a grand fleet of sailing ships loaded with trade goods, embarking on a long and treacherous journey down the Red Sea. The depictions show the exotic nature of Punt, the beehive-shaped houses built on stilts, the unfamiliar animals, and the distinct physique of its ruler. The goal was to establish a peaceful trade relationship, bartering Egyptian goods like jewelry, weapons, and tools for the most coveted item of all, lavmer trees, their roots carefully balled in baskets, to be transported back to Egypt and planted in the temple gardens. This was an attempt to domesticate divinity itself, to bring the source of the sacred sent directly under Egyptian control. For the resin hunters operating in the eastern desert, the danger was more immediate and constant. These men, often employed by the state or powerful temples, would spend weeks in the arid wadis, navigating by the stars and searching for the scattered, gnarly boswellia trees from which frankincense is harvested. The work was incredibly precise. They had to make careful incisions in the bark at just the right time of year, and then wait for the precious sap to slowly weep out and harden into pearly white tears on the tree's surface. These tears were then carefully scraped off and collected. The entire process required camping near the trees for extended periods, exposed to extreme temperatures, scarce water, and the constant threat of nomadic raiders who coveted the valuable cargo. Because of this ever-present danger, these expeditions were always heavily guarded. A resin gathering party was never just a group of gatherers, it was a small mobile fortress. They traveled with contingent of soldiers armed with bows, spears, and throw sticks. They established fortified way stations along known routes and moved with a clear defensive strategy, often with scouts ranging ahead to check for ambushes. The value of the resin justified this military escort. By weight, high-quality frankincense and myrrh were worth more than gold. A single sack could make a man wealthy for life, making the caravan a giant target moving slowly through the desert. This immense cost and danger is what transformed these raw materials into the ultimate status symbols. Owning a vial of pure myrrh oil wasn't just about smelling good, it was a public display of immense wealth, divine favor, and global connection. It said that you, or the temple you supported, had the power to command missions to the ends of the earth and the resources to protect the priceless treasures on their journey home. When a priest burned frankincense in a ceremony, the smoke represented not just a prayer, but an empire's reach. When a noblewoman anointed her wrists with imported balm, she was wearing the scent of adventure, power, and a civilization's unwavering pursuit of the divine. Imagine these vast temple complexes not just as centers of prayer, but as sprawling, open-air laboratories of fragrance. Beyond the towering pylons and echoing hypostyle halls lay an unexpected landscape, meticulously planned botanical gardens, dedicated exclusively to cultivating the sacred plants that fueled the entire perfume-making industry. These were not decorative flower beds. They were the agricultural heart of Egyptian spirituality, where priest-botanists, who were both scientists and holy men, practiced a form of sacred horticulture. The most famous of these were located in the fertile, marshy stretches of the Nile Delta, where the rich soil and abundant water created an ideal nursery for both native and imported species. Here, in these sanctified plots, the priests worked to tame the wild essence of the divine, bringing exotic plants from the farthest corners of the known world under Egyptian control and into the service of the gods. Managing these gardens required engineering genius, particularly when it came to water. The Nile's annual inundation was a blessing for broad agriculture, but the delicate, precious plants used for perfume needed a more consistent and controlled supply. The priest-botanists oversaw the construction of sophisticated irrigation systems, a network of canals and shadows, those long, counterweighted poles with buckets on the end that lifted water from the Nile's channels to feed the garden beds. They engineered clever drainage solutions to prevent waterlogging for species that preferred drier roots, like the juniper bushes, while creating specially designed bog areas for water-loving plants like the prized blue and white lotus. This mastery over water transformed the delta into a man-made ecosystem, a patchwork of microclimates where a frankincense tree from the arid mountains of Punt could grow alongside papyrus reeds and Egyptian henna flowers. The work of these priest-botanists went far beyond simple cultivation. They were pioneers in crossbreeding and selective breeding, conducting experiments to improve the fragrance, hardiness, and yield of their sacred crops. While we have no written manuals of their techniques, archaeological evidence suggests they practiced a form of early botany akin to what we would now call hybridization. By carefully selecting seeds from the most aromatic lotus blossoms or the most resin-rich myrrh shrubs, they could, over generations, cultivate super strains of these plants. A single lotus flower grown in the temple gardens of Bastet, dedicated to the goddess Bastet, might be renowned throughout Egypt for its uniquely intense and long-lasting scent, a direct result of this careful generations-long stewardship. This wasn't just gardening, it was a continuous act of devotion, an effort to perfect the very materials through which humanity could communicate with the divine. These temple gardens also served as a living library and a quarantine zone for newly acquired species. When a royal expedition returned from Punt with live myrrh trees, as famously depicted in Hatshepsut's temple, the first stop for these precious saplings was not a royal park but the temple gardens. Here, the priest-botanists could study the foreign plants, learn their needs, and slowly acclimate them to the Egyptian environment. This process protected the larger agricultural economy. If a newly introduced plant carried a pest or disease, it would be contained within a temple ground. Successfully cultivating a foreign species was a monumental achievement, a sign of the temple's, and by extension, the pharaoh's power to domesticate the exotic. A thriving grove of frankincense trees in the delta was a potent symbol of Egypt's cosmic reach, a living testament to the idea that even the gods of distant lands could be persuaded to take root and flourish under the watchful eyes of Egypt's priests. Yet for all their ingenuity with fats and oils, the ancient Egyptian perfumers were not limited to just one method. They also pioneered an early form of steam distillation, a technique that would not become widespread in the West for over 1,000 years. While they lacked the complex glass alembics of later alchemists, their version was brilliantly adapted to the materials they had. Archaeological evidence suggests they used a two-pot system made of pottery. The first pot, placed directly over a fire, would contain a mixture of water and fragrant plant material, perhaps mint leaves or cedar shavings. As the water boiled, the steam would carry the volatile aromatic compounds upward through a connecting tube made of reed or hollowed wood. This steam would then travel into a second, cooler pot, where it would condense back into a liquid. The precious essential oil, being lighter than water, would rise to the surface, where it could be carefully skimmed off. This was a rudimentary still, but it worked on the very same principles that drive modern essential oil production today. It allowed them to capture the pure, potent soul of a plant in a way that enfleurage could not, creating incredibly concentrated fragrances that were the pinnacle of their chemical art. Alongside these advanced techniques, they perfected the simpler but equally vital art of maceration. This was their way of creating what we might think of as infused oils, the workhorses of both perfumery and medicine. The process was straightforward but required patience. They would take a base oil, often pressed from locally abundant bend nuts or olives, and immerse large quantities of bruised or crushed aromatic material into it, things like lily flowers, fenugreek seeds, or cinnamon bark. This mixture would then be left to sit in the warm Egyptian sun for weeks or even months. The heat would gently coax the fat-soluble scent molecules out of the plant matter and into the oil, slowly transforming the plain base into a fragrant golden unguent. To accelerate the process and ensure a stronger infusion, they would sometimes gently heat the mixture in a double boiler system made of nested clay pots, carefully regulating the temperature to avoid burning the delicate aromas. This method was less about capturing the most fleeting top notes and more about creating stable, long-lasting base notes for their perfume compositions and effective carriers for medicinal herbs. What is truly staggering is that these were not isolated, accidental discoveries. These techniques represent a systematic, scientific approach to chemistry that was centuries ahead of its time. The perfumers operated with a deep, empirical understanding of solubility, knowing which aromas would be released into steam, which would bind to fat, and which would infuse into oil. They manipulated states of matter, transforming solids and liquids into vapors and back again, Their workshops were, in every sense, the world's first chemical laboratories, and their practitioners were the earliest chemists. They kept detailed, if secret, mental records of formulas, ratios, and reaction times, passing this knowledge down through generations. This wasn't mere craft. It was a rigorous science dedicated to unlocking the hidden properties of the natural world, all in the pursuit of capturing something as seemingly intangible as a beautiful smell. In doing so, they laid the foundational stones for entire fields of study that would only be formally recognized millennia later. These extraordinary potions demanded vessels that were equally magnificent and functional. The ancient Egyptians understood that a fine perfume was a living thing, sensitive to light and air, and they engineered their containers with a sophisticated understanding of preservation. The most prized material for storage was calcite alabaster, a beautiful translucent white stone veined with soft hues of gold and amber. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was a brilliant scientific one. Alabaster is a naturally temperature-regulating material, its cool, dense surface acting as a perfect insulator against the intense Egyptian heat, protecting the precious oils inside from spoiling. The stone was also non-porous, ensuring the complex chemical signature of the fragrance wouldn't be tainted or absorbed. Craftsmen would hollow out these vessels with incredible skill, often creating tall, elegant jars with wide bodies and narrow necks, a design that minimized the precious oil's exposure to the oxidizing air every time the stopper was removed. For the most elite members of society, the choice of vessel also served as a public declaration of the scent within, thanks to a complex language of symbolic shapes. You wouldn't just have a generic jar for your perfume, you would have a specific container whose form immediately communicated its contents to anyone who saw it. A jar crafted in the shape of a hyes vase, with its wide, flat foot and flared rim, was a ceremonial vessel, likely holding a sacred oil like the ones used in temple rituals. A container modeled after a pomegranate, with its segmented, rounded body, almost certainly held a fruity, sweet fragrance associated with love and the goddess Hathor. Perhaps the most evocative were the jars shaped like a tied bundle of lotus blossoms, their delicate petals forever captured in stone, signaling to all that within rested the intoxicating essence of the blue lotus itself. This was a culture that communicated through symbol and form, and your perfume bottle was a key part of your identity. Beyond stone, artisans worked magic with faience, a self-glazing quartz ceramic that could be molded into stunningly vibrant shades of turquoise, cobalt blue, and lapis lazuli. These brightly colored vessels were particularly popular for everyday use, and for holding the solid perfumed greases and unguents that were applied to the skin. The glass workshops of ancient Egypt were also pioneers, developing techniques for core forming that allowed them to create intricate small bottles with swirling patterns of brilliant color. These delicate glass vessels were often shaped like dates, figs, or even fish, their playful forms belying the incredible technical achievement they represented. Each material, from the cool majesty of alabaster to the bright cheer of faience, was carefully matched to the social and spiritual purpose of the scent it held, ensuring that from the temple altar to a noblewoman's dressing table, the vessel was always a worthy home for a piece of the divine. Far beyond the grand temples and royal courts, the art of Egyptian perfumery found its most personal and enduring expression in the daily beauty rituals of its people. For the ancient Egyptians, cleanliness and fragrance were inseparable from both social grace and spiritual purity, and their cosmetics were never merely about altering one's appearance. They were holistic sensory experiences designed to protect the body, please the gods, and project one's place in the social order, all through the medium of scent. An Egyptian's morning routine was a carefully orchestrated ceremony of aroma, where every product applied to the skin or hair was imbued with a specific, meaningful fragrance. Consider the iconic kohl that lined the eyes of men, women, and children. This was far more than a cosmetic for enhancing the gaze. It was a potent amulet against the harsh desert sun, believed to ward off eye infections and the evil eye itself. But it was also perfumed. The finely ground powders of galena or malachite were meticulously mixed with aromatic oils, often infused with frankincense or myrrh, before being stored in beautifully carved cosmetic jars. When applied with a moistened applicator stick, the coal would release its subtle, sacred aroma throughout the day, creating a personal cloud of protection that was both smelled and seen. Every time the wearer blinked, a faint whisper of temple incense would rise from their eyelids, a constant, intimate reminder of the god's watchful presence. The most luxurious and fragrant of all skin treatments were the precious unguents. These rich, perfumed oils and fats were essential in the dry, hot climate, serving as both moisturizer and sunscreen. But their function was profoundly social. At a banquet, a host would show esteem to their highest-ranking guests by offering them a scented oil as they arrived. Servants would place a cone of solid, perfumed unguent atop the heads of guests, a practice immortalized in countless tomb paintings. As the evening progressed and the room grew warm from bodies and lamps, this cone, often made of a fat like tallow or lard infused with cinnamon, lotus, and myrrh, would slowly melt. It would trickle down the wig and shoulders, cooling the skin and releasing an intoxicating cascade of fragrance that evolved throughout the night. This wasn't just practical, it was a performance of wealth and generosity, a way of anointing one's guests with pleasure and marking them as members of an elite, fragrant class. Even the humble wig became a sophisticated vehicle for sustained scent release. Wigs worn by elites to denote status and maintain cleanliness were not made of plain hair. The wearer would first rub a perfumed oil into their scalp, then carefully position the wig, which itself had been treated. Perfumers developed a technique of weaving tiny, porous pellets of scented wax or fat into the wig's foundation. The body heat from the wearer's head would gently warm these pellets, causing them to emit a continuous, low-level fragrance that would last for hours. Walking through a crowded market or temple, an elite Egyptian would be preceded and followed by their unique aromatic signature, a complex blend of lily, cypress, and honey that announced their status and refinement long before they ever spoke a word. This seamless integration of scent into every aspect of adornment reveals a culture for which beauty was a multi-sensory art, and where to be cleansed, anointed, and fragrant was to be in a state of perfect balance both with society and the divine. And this profound belief in the power of fragrance extended seamlessly into the realm of medicine, where priests and physicians were often one and the same. In the ancient Egyptian worldview, there was no separation between spiritual malaise and physical illness. A sickness of the body was a symptom of a disquieted spirit or the influence of a malign force. Therefore, the same sacred aromas used to please a god could be called upon to heal a human. Medical papyri, like the famed Ebers papyrus, reveal a sophisticated system of medical aromatherapy where perfumed oils and fragrant incenses were first-line treatments for everything from common headaches to life-threatening epidemics. The approach was systematic and surprisingly empirical. For a throbbing headache, a common prescription was to prepare a poultice of ground-up frankincense pellets, mix them into a paste with lotus oil and honey, and apply it directly to the forehead. The gentle, soothing aroma of the frankincense, combined with the analgesic and anti-inflammatory properties we now know it possesses, would offer genuine relief. But to the Egyptian healer, the treatment was twofold. The physical properties eased the pain, while the sacred fragrance of the resin drove out the evil spirits believed to be causing the affliction. For digestive complaints, a treatment might involve a drink infused with crushed mint and cinnamon, ingredients we still use today for their carminative and soothing qualities. The patient would ingest the medicine, but they would also inhale its sharp, cleansing aroma, believing it purified the body from the inside out. Perhaps the most advanced applications were in the treatment of mental and emotional distress. The Egyptians displayed a remarkably modern understanding of the connection between scent and psychological state. A patient suffering from lethargy or depression might be treated with invigorating solar aromas, citrusy frankincense, or energizing cinnamon to align them with the revitalizing power of the sun god Ra. Conversely, for anxiety, agitation, or insomnia, the treatment called for the calming, lunar scents of the blue lotus or chamomile. Physicians would have these patients recline in a quiet room while a censer burned these relaxing aromatics nearby, creating a serene atmosphere designed to ease the mind and invite peaceful sleep. This practice of using ambient fragrance to alter mood and mental state is a direct ancestor of our modern concept of aromatherapy. The ultimate expression of this medical philosophy was deployed during times of widespread plague. When a sickness swept through a community, priests and physicians would orchestrate a massive public health intervention using scent. They would place large braziers at street corners, in marketplaces, and at the gates of temples, burning enormous quantities of antimicrobial resins like myrrh and frankincense. The entire city would be blanketed in a protective cloud of fragrant smoke. While they believed this powerful aroma created a spiritual barrier against the demons of disease, we now understand the science behind it. The antimicrobial properties released by burning these resins would have actually helped purify the air and slow the spread of airborne pathogens. It was a breathtaking fusion of spiritual ritual and effective public health policy, all orchestrated through the medium of sacred perfume. The royal anointing ritual was a sacred start to each day, a private ceremony where the pharaoh was transformed from a mortal man into a living god through the medium of scent. Upon waking, the ruler would be conducted to a special chamber where his personal perfumer, a priest of the highest rank, awaited with a chest of precious oils. This was not a quick application of cologne. It was a meticulous, symbolic dressing of the divine body, with each oil applied to a specific part of the anatomy in a prescribed order. The right arm was anointed first, then the left, followed by the torso and the legs, each action accompanied by a specific incantation that activated the oil's magical properties. This daily practice was as vital to the king's sovereignty as wearing the double crown, for it was believed that without this fragrant armor, his divine power could wane, leaving the kingdom vulnerable to chaos. The choice of scent was never random. It followed a celestial schedule mirroring the sun's journey. At the break of dawn, as the first light of Ra touched the palace, the king would be anointed with a light, bright fragrance to energize his spirit and align him with the newborn day. This morning unguent was often solar and invigorating, perhaps a blend featuring the crisp, clean aroma of frankincense or the citrus-like scent of lemongrass, both meant to sharpen the mind and symbolize the illumination he brought to the land. As the sun climbed to its zenith around midday, a second, more complex oil would be applied. This midday scent acted as a spiritual sustainer, a blend of stabilizing aromas like the warm, earthy notes of cedarwood or cypress, designed to maintain the king's authority and focus through the heat of the day's duties and judgment. The evening brought the most potent and protective anointing. As the sun set and the dangerous hours of night approached, the forces of chaos were believed to grow stronger. The twilight unguent was therefore a powerful aromatic shield. This blend was deep, resinous, and somber, heavily featuring myrrh for its connections to the protective underworld god Osiris, and the smoky, purifying scent of juniper to ward off evil spirits in the darkness. This final application was a crucial piece of spiritual armor, ensuring the god king's safety as he symbolically traveled through the perilous night, just as the sun god Ra journeyed through the underworld to be reborn again at dawn. Beyond the daily cycle, specific ceremonies demanded their own unique fragrances. Before a critical meeting of the court, the pharaoh might be anointed with a special oil designed to enhance his eloquence and persuasion, perhaps infused with honey for sweet speech and mint for mental clarity. Before leading the army into battle, he would receive a powerful unguent of fierce, aggressive aromatics like coriander and cumin, believed to instill fear in the hearts of his enemies and imbue his own soldiers with courage. Each of these sacred oils was far more than a perfume. It was a concentration of intention, a liquid prayer that clothed the king in the very attributes he needed to rule, protect, and maintain the sacred order of Maat for all of Egypt. The journey of these sacred ingredients from a distant desert tree to a pharaoh's alabaster vase was safeguarded by a web of secrecy so tight it functioned like a state intelligence network. The entire supply chain, from harvest to final blend, was protected by a system of coded language, disguised transports, and the ever-present threat of severe punishment. The first layer of defense was the recipe itself, which was never written down in plain language. Instead, master perfumers used a secret lexicon of code names for common ingredients, a practice that effectively encrypted the formulas. A jar might be labeled not with frankincense, but with a cryptic term like tears of the mountain god, or myrrh might be referred to in temple records as the blood of Osiris. These codes were known only to the initiated, ensuring that even if a recipe scroll was stolen or copied by a foreign spy, its true meaning would remain an indecipherable mystery. Securing the physical cargo was an operation worthy of a military campaign. A shipment of frankincense resin, for instance, was far too valuable to travel as a simple trade good. To throw off would-be thieves and rival powers. Egyptian merchants became masters of deception. A prized shipment of resin might be hidden inside a mundane consignment of pottery, sealed within large, ordinary-looking amphorae that were actually filled with the precious tear. Other times, the cargo would be split across multiple ships traveling different routes along the Nile or the Red Sea, so that no single vessel carried a complete high-value load that would be worth the risk of a pirate attack. The most precious ingredient of all, the live saplings of myrrh trees brought back from Punt, were transported under the heaviest guard, treated with the same level of security as a visiting head of state. This culture of absolute secrecy was enforced by the most brutal of deterrents. Revealing a state perfume secret, whether a trade route, a harvesting technique, or a sacred formula, was not considered a simple crime. It was an act of treason against the pharaoh and an offense against the gods themselves. The punishments were severe and designed to serve as a stark warning to others. Historical accounts and temple inscriptions suggest that the penalty could include mutilation, such as having one's nose or hands cut off, a painfully symbolic act for a perfumer, effectively ending their career. In the most extreme cases, for revealing the secrets of a pharaoh's personal scent or a god's sacred Kai-Fi blend, the punishment was execution, often by burning or being buried alive, a fate meant to completely erase the betrayer from existence. This harsh reality meant that a master perfumer carried his knowledge not just as a skill, but as a sacred and dangerous burden, one he would defend with his life, taking the empire's most fragrant secrets with him to his grave. Yet this sacred and political power of fragrance also extended into the most intimate corners of life, where perfume became a potent tool of the heart. In ancient Egypt, love and magic were deeply intertwined, and no spell for attraction or fidelity was considered complete without its own specially crafted aromatic component. Perfumers, therefore, also served as apothecaries of affection, blending oils and unguents with specific ingredients believed to stir desire, bind lovers together, and protect the sacred bond of marriage. These love potions were not mere superstition. They were a sophisticated application of the belief that scent could directly influence emotion and willpower, making them a serious and sought-after branch of the perfumer's art. The most common use was in attraction spells, designed to draw a desired partner near. A typical recipe might involve creating a special oil infused with ingredients that carried strong symbolic connections to love deities like Hathor or Bes, the god of the household and childbirth. A woman seeking to capture a man's attention might anoint her wrists and neck with an oil steeped in the scent of red ochre and coriander, ingredients thought to generate heat and excitement. She might even discreetly dab a drop of this perfumed blend onto a piece of her lover's clothing or his chair, a subtle magical act meant to occupy his thoughts with her presence. The power was believed to be in the aroma itself, a sensory command that could bypass rational thought and speak directly to the primal instincts of the heart. For those already in a relationship, different blends aimed to ensure loyalty and fidelity. Marital perfumes were often heavier, centered on ingredients like myrrh and honey. Myrrh, with its deep, serious, and preservative qualities, symbolized the enduring, stable nature of a committed bond. Honey, incredibly expensive and prized, represented the sweetness and pleasure of the relationship. A wife might prepare a shared unguent for herself and her husband, a ritual of anointing that was both a physical intimacy and a magical reaffirmation of their vows. This act was a charm against wandering eyes, a way of creating a shared aromatic identity that would, in theory, make the thought of another partner smell foreign and unappealing. The most potent applications were reserved for rekindling passion or mending a strained marriage. Papyrus scrolls containing magical spells often include detailed instructions for these romantic reconciliations. One spell might direct a woman to blend 7 specific seeds, like fenugreek and lettuce, seed with the milk of a mother who bore a male child, and then perfume the entire mixture with essences of lotus and rose. This complex potion would be secretly added to her husband's food or drink. While we might view this as a questionable practice today, in the Egyptian context, it was a legitimate attempt to use all available means, both natural and supernatural, to heal a relationship. The fragrant ingredients were chosen for their known soothing and aphrodisiac properties, a physical support for the magical intention behind the spell. In the world of Egyptian love magic, perfume was the ultimate persuasive weapon, a silent, invisible language that could whisper of devotion, shout of desire, and weave a spell of connection that was as powerful as it was fragrant. But the most profound and public expression of this sacred power was reserved for the great religious festivals, when the entire concept of perfume was transformed from a private offering into a massive, collective spectacle. Imagine the city of Thebes during the beautiful festival of the Valley, a time when the barriers between the living and the dead were believed to dissolve. The streets would be packed with thousands of citizens, a vibrant, moving tapestry of humanity awaiting the procession of the god Ammon's statue from the Karnak temple. The air itself would be thick with anticipation, and then the priests would begin their work. From the rooftops of temples and from specially constructed wooden platforms along the procession route, teams of acolytes would use large fans or ostrich feather flabella to waft great clouds of fragrant smoke out over the crowd. This was not the subtle burning of incense in a closed chamber. This was a deliberate, overwhelming sensory bombardment, a fragrant fog designed to engulf every single person in attendance. The goal was nothing less than the creation of a shared spiritual experience through scent. As the thick, sweet smoke of kaifi and myrrh rolled over the masses, a palpable shift would occur. The individual anxieties, the social divisions, the very sense of self would begin to soften and blur within this aromatic cloud. The Egyptians believed that in breathing in this sacred smoke together, the people were literally inhaling the presence of the god. Their lungs filled with the same divine essence, their hearts beat in rhythm with the same intoxicating aroma. This collective inhalation was a form of communion, a moment where an entire city became, briefly, a single organism united in devotion, all breathing the same divine breath. It was a powerful tool for social cohesion, reinforcing a shared identity and a common purpose under the benevolent gaze of the gods. The generosity of the temples during these events was also a calculated display of their immense wealth and power. The amount of precious resin and oil consumed in these public ceremonies was staggering, a literal burning of treasure that only the most powerful institutions could afford. By freely distributing this incredibly expensive commodity to the masses, the priesthood was demonstrating their boundless resources and their role as the exclusive intermediaries to the divine. For a common laborer or farmer who can never afford such luxuries, to be anointed with a drop of temple-grade lotus oil or to breathe deep the smoke of pure frankincense was a rare and unforgettable taste of the divine luxury reserved for kings and gods. It was a gift that fostered immense goodwill and loyalty, binding the people ever closer to the temple and ensuring its central place in the community's life. These festivals reached their olfactory climax with the practice of the dispensing of the unguents. Following the processions, priests would set up stations in the temple courtyards, offering small clay pots or shells filled with perfumed grease to the public. People would press forward not with greed, but with reverence to receive their portion. They would immediately anoint their wrists, their foreheads, and the statues of their personal household gods that they had brought with them. In that moment, the entire city would begin to smell the same. The unique sacred fragrance of the festival became a shared skin, olfactory uniform that erased class distinctions and marked everyone as a participant in the sacred event. As they returned home, they carried the scent with them, a lingering reminder of the divine connection they had experienced, ensuring that the power of the festival did not end at the temple gates, but permeated every home and alleyway for days to come. And the perfumer's palette extended far beyond the world of plants into a more surprising and visceral realm, the animal kingdom. To create the most complex, long-lasting, and captivating fragrances, the Egyptian masters turned to some of the most potent and rare ingredients on earth, substances that came not from blossoms or resins, but from the very bodies of creatures. These animal-derived musks provided the deep, foundational notes that gave their sacred blends incredible staying power and a mysterious, sensual warmth that plant oils alone could never achieve. The most prized of these were musk, civet, and the legendary ambergris, each with its own strange origin and a difficult, often dangerous, process of collection. Musk, the most famous of these, was sought from a surprising source, a small, shy deer native to distant lands far to the east of Egypt. The male musk deer possesses a gland, a small pod located near its navel, that secretes a dark, paste-like substance of almost overwhelming odor. In its raw state, this musk is intensely animalic and pungent, but when expertly diluted and aged, it transforms into one of the most beautiful and complex scents known, a warm, profound, and subtly sweet aroma that acts as a powerful fixative, holding all the other notes of a perfume together and allowing them to linger on the skin for hours. Acquiring it was an immense challenge. Egyptian traders would have to barter with distant networks that stretched into the Himalayas, trading gold and glass for tiny, precious pods of this dried gland, each one representing a significant fortune. Then there was civet, a substance harvested from the perineal glands of the civet cat, a small, nocturnal mammal. The process of collecting civet was as unpleasant as it was fascinating. Keepers would house these animals in captivity, and using a small spatula, would carefully scrape the paste from the glands. The raw material was famously foul, described as intensely fecal and aggressive. But like musk, it underwent a magical transformation. Through meticulous dilution and aging, its harshness softened into a mesmerizingly warm, leathery, and musky scent with a delicate floral undertone. The Egyptians valued civet for its ability to add a vibrant, animalic lift to floral compositions, giving the scent of a lotus or lily an intriguing, almost human-like warmth and depth that suggested living skin rather than just a flower. But the most mysterious and mystical of all animal ingredients was ambergris. Unlike the others, this was not harvested from a living creature but found, a treasure waiting to be discovered. Ambergris is a rare formation from the digestive system of the sperm whale, a waxy substance that the whale secretes to protect its gut from the sharp beaks of the giant squid it consumed. This mass is then expelled into the ocean, where it must float for decades, baked by the sun and washed by the salt water, undergoing a miraculous metamorphosis. What begins as a foul-smelling black lump slowly weathers into a hard, gray, waxy stone with a scent that is utterly unique and incredibly complex. A marine, earthy fragrance with deep notes of old wood, sweet tobacco, and the briny sea air, all underpinned by a soft animal musk that is both alluring and indefinable. Because it could only be found by chance, washed up on remote beaches, or discovered by sailors, ambergris was worth more than its weight in gold. It was considered a gift from the sea god Sobek himself, a divine substance that had been purified and perfected by the elements. In perfumery, it was the ultimate fixative and scent enhancer. A tiny amount grated into a perfume blend would not only make the fragrance last for an astonishingly long time, but would also add a captivating, velvety smoothness that rounded out any harsh edges and gave the entire composition a profound, almost mystical depth. To wear a perfume containing ambergris was to wear a piece of a deep ocean mystery, a scent that spoke of vast, unexplored waters and mythical sea creatures. The use of these animal products reveals a perfumery that was unafraid of complexity and contradiction, masterfully blending the beautiful with the animalistic to create scents that were as intriguing and multifaceted as humanity itself. This intricate world of scent was not a free-for-all of personal preference. In ancient Egypt, fragrance was a powerful social signal, and its use was governed by a rigid hierarchy as structured as the society itself. Your place in the world determined what you could wear, and the rules were enforced through formal sumptuary laws, decrees, that regulated luxury and consumption based on social rank. To wear a scent above your station was not just a fashion faux pas. It was a transgression against the divine order of Mat, an act of arrogance that could upset the cosmic balance and invite chaos. At the very pinnacle of this aromatic pyramid stood the pharaoh and the high priests. They alone had access to the most sacred and complex blends, the ones that were believed to contain the very essence of the gods. The legendary Kai-Fi incense, with its 16 ingredients, was strictly for temple use, burned only by purified priests during twilight ceremonies to commune with deities. A pharaoh's personal signature scent, perhaps a blend featuring vast quantities of imported myrrh and the rarest blue lotus absolute, was his alone. For a noble or a commoner to attempt to replicate or wear such a fragrance would have been seen as a direct challenge to the king's divine authority, an attempt to steal a piece of his godhood. The priesthood operated under its own set of strict olfactory rules. A priest serving a specific god would be required to wear the sacred oil associated with that deity while performing rituals. A priest of Ra might anoint himself with the solar, invigorating frankincense blend, while a priest of Osiris would use a somber, earthy myrrh unguent. This was a mandatory part of their ritual purity, a way of aligning their own human essence with the divine nature of the god they served. Outside of the temple, however, they were often forbidden from wearing these powerful sacred scents in daily life, as their role was separate from the secular world. Their fragrance was a uniform for divine service, not for personal adornment. For the noble elite, the viziers, generals, and high officials, the world of perfume was one of displayed wealth and political connection. They could wear exquisite and expensive fragrances, but they were often legally barred from using the specific sacred formulas reserved for the pharaoh and the inner temple sanctum. Their status was communicated through the quality and provenance of their scents. Wearing a clearly imported oil from Punt or a lavish lotus blend signaled that they moved in powerful circles and could afford the finest luxuries. Their perfumes were a key part of their political identity, a sensory proof of their elite status and their favor with the crown. The vast majority of the population, the farmers, laborers, and artisans, participated in this fragrant culture in a more humble but still meaningful way. They were not permitted the exotic, imported resins or the labor-intensive floral absolutes. Instead, their scents were derived from locally abundant and affordable materials. They might use simple infused oils made from native flowers like chrysanthemum or chamomile, aromatic herbs like mint and cumin from their gardens, or the sharp, clean scent of pressed radish seed oil. These were not without their own beauty and purpose. They offered cleanliness, a pleasant aroma, and a sense of personal care, but they clearly demarcated a social boundary. The scent of a commoner was distinctly Egyptian, but it was of the earth, not the heavens. This system was enforced through a combination of social pressure, temple authority, and the royal treasury's control over trade. The state held a monopoly on the import of the most precious raw materials. Frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and lavemur trees were crown property. Their distribution was carefully managed, making it physically impossible for someone outside the approved circles to obtain them in any significant quantity. To be caught selling sacred-grade Kai-Fi resin on the black market, or wearing a clearly royal fragrance would have resulted in severe penalties, from heavy fines and confiscation of property to public humiliation and even exile. In a society where scent was power, controlling its flow was a primary method of maintaining the established order, ensuring that everyone, from the god king to the humble farmer, literally knew their place by the fragrance they wore. Faced with the relentless Egyptian sun, the master perfumers became brilliant innovators in preservation, knowing their precious creations were as fragile as they were powerful. The most immediate and effective solution was to go underground. They constructed deep, cool cellars beneath their workshops and temples, often lined with thick, mud brick walls that provided natural insulation. In these subterranean vaults, the temperature remained remarkably stable and significantly lower than the scorching heat above ground. This constant, cool environment was essential for slowing the oxidation process that could turn a fine floral oil rancid or cause a complex ricinus blend to degrade and lose its subtle top note. Jars of precious lotus absolute or a pharaoh's signature unguent would be carefully shelved in these dark, quiet spaces, resting in the earth's embrace until the moment they were needed for ritual or adornment. The design of the storage vessels themselves was a masterclass in material science and chemistry. Beyond the beautiful alabaster jars for display, perfumers relied on a range of specialized pottery for their everyday work and long-term storage. They developed double-walled amphorae, where a void of air between two layers of fired clay created a powerful insulating barrier against external heat. Even more common were pots with highly porous, unglazed bodies, typically made from a specific type of Nile silk clay. When these pots were filled with liquid, a small amount would seep into the tiny pores of the clay and evaporate on the outer surface. This continuous evaporation process, much like sweating in humans, actually pulled heat away from the contents inside, actively cooling the precious oils they held. This simple yet brilliant passive cooling system kept the fragrances at a more stable temperature than the surrounding air. Their ingenuity extended deep into the formulas themselves. These ancient chemists discovered that certain natural additives could dramatically extend the shelf life of their perfumes. They learned that honey, a staple sweetener, was also a powerful natural preservative due to its low water content and high acidity, which inhibits microbial growth. By adding small, measured amounts of honey to their oil-based perfumes, they could prevent spoilage and stabilize the blend. Similarly, high-proof palm wine or barley beer was sometimes used as a solvent for certain aromatic extracts, as the alcohol content acted as a disinfectant. They also utilized the natural antioxidant properties of many resins. Adding a small amount of frankincense or myrrh to a delicate floral perfume wasn't just for scent, it helped prevent the more volatile floral notes from breaking down. Some evidence even suggests they understood the preservative power of salt, using tiny quantities in certain water-based aromatic preparations. Perhaps one of their most sophisticated preservation techniques was the creation of solid perfumes. By taking a base of hard animal fat or beeswax and kneading in highly concentrated essential oils and crushed dried flowers, they created solid scent cakes or cones. In this solid state, the volatile aromatic molecules were trapped within the stable fat or wax matrix, dramatically reducing their exposure to air and heat, the two main catalysts for spoilage. A solid perfume could last for months or even years without degrading, only releasing its fragrance when a small amount was scraped off and warmed on the skin. This made it the perfect format for travel, for trade, and for the scented cones worn at banquets. Every aspect of their process, from the deep cellars to the wax-sealed jars, reveals a profound and practical understanding of their environment, turning the challenge of the harsh climate into a catalyst for some of the most ingenious preservation techniques the ancient world would ever see. For the master perfumers of the temples, creating a sacred fragrance was an act of cosmic architecture. They believed that the universe itself was constructed upon perfect mathematical principles, a concept known as mad, which represented truth, balance, and harmonic order. To simply mix ingredients by instinct or rough measure would have been unthinkable. It would have been like building a temple without a foundation. Instead, they employed a sophisticated system of sacred geometry, using specific, revered numerical ratios to proportion their ingredients, believing this encoded the perfume with a divine frequency that could resonate with the gods. This practice was deeply intertwined with their understanding of music and astronomy. The most important of these ratios was the sacred fraction of 1/2, or the harmonic ratio of 2:1. This was not a random choice. They observed that plucking a string stretched over a sound box produced a certain note. If they have the length of that string and plucked it again, the note produced was a perfect octave higher, a sound of pure, harmonious resonance. This mathematical relationship between proportion and beautiful sound was seen as a fundamental law of the universe, a physical manifestation of math. The perfumers, therefore, applied this same 2:1 ratio to their most sacred blends. For a kai-fi offering to a major deity like Amun-Ra, a master might use 2 parts of a solar ingredient like frankincense to 1 part of a more earthly stabilizer like sweet flagroot, mathematically engineering the scent to vibrate at this perfect harmonic frequency. Beyond this foundational ratio, they utilized other significant geometric proportions. The ratio of 3:2, which in music creates the interval of a perfect fifth, was considered the proportion of life and vitality, associated with the god Osiris and the cycle of death and rebirth. A funerary unguent might be built on this framework, perhaps blending 3 parts of preservative cedar oil with 2 parts of myrrh, the scent of the underworld, to create a potion that actively promoted regeneration. The ratio of 4:3, which produces a perfect fourth in music, was linked to stability, foundation, and the solidity of the earth god, Geb. A perfume designed for a pharaoh to wear during a court judgment, where he needed to project unshakable authority, might be constructed on this 4:3 foundation, blending 4 parts of a stabilizing scent like cypress with 3 parts of an empowering aroma like cinnamon. The entire process of mixing was itself a physical ritual of geometric creation. The perfumer would not simply dump ingredients into a bowl. He would arrange them in a circular vessel, itself a symbol of eternity and perfection, and would often add them in sequences based on sacred numbers, perhaps in 7 steps for the 7 celestial bodies known to them, or in 12 steps for the hours of the night that the sun god Ra had to navigate. As he mixed, he would move his stirring rod in specific patterned movements, clockwise to invoke creation and solar energy, or in a figure 8 pattern, the symbol of infinity, to grant the blend eternal potency. Each step was a deliberate act of mathematical and spiritual intention, layering numerology upon sacred geometry upon aromatic science. The resulting perfume was far more than a pleasant mixture. It was a carefully calculated sonic key tuned to a specific divine wavelength, designed not just to be smelled, but to be heard by the gods themselves. The preparation of the body was merely the beginning of the fragrant journey into eternity. Once the mummy was perfectly anointed and swathed in linen, the ancient Egyptians turned their attention to the tomb itself, transforming the entire burial chamber into a scented vessel for the soul's journey. The walls of the burial chamber were not left bare. They were often coated in a layer of plaster mixed with aromatic substances like myrrh and frankincense. As the plaster dried and set, it would slowly release a subtle, sacred fragrance for years, even decades, after the tomb was sealed. This created a perpetual atmosphere of sanctity, ensuring the deceased rested in an environment that was eternally pure and pleasing to the gods who might visit. The grave goods interred with the deceased were chosen with meticulous care for both their practical and their aromatic symbolism. A noblewoman would be buried with her alabaster cosmetic jars, still filled with her favorite lily and lotus perfumes, so she could anoint herself in the afterlife and remain eternally beautiful and desirable. A scribe would have his palette and pots of ink, but the ink itself might be subtly scented with tamarisk or cedar to please the gods of wisdom as he recorded his deeds. Even the simplest wooden models of bakers and brewers, designed to provide magical sustenance for the ka, or soul, were sometimes crafted from aromatic woods like juniper or acacia, their very essence contributing to the perfumed atmosphere of the tomb. Food offerings for the deceased were also deeply entwined with scent. It was believed that the ka did not consume the physical substance of the food, but absorbed its life-giving aroma. Therefore, the most fragrant foods were considered the most nourishing for the soul. Bunches of grapes, dates, and figs were included not just for their sweetness, but for their potent, fruity fragrance. Jars of beer and wine were sealed within the tomb, their fermented, yeasty aromas promising eternal celebration and sustenance. Loaves of bread were sometimes baked with coriander or other spices, making them as aromatic as they were nutritious, a final act of care from the living to ensure the dead would never hunger. This belief that the soul navigated by scent reached its most profound expression in the perilous journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. This was not a simple passage. It was a labyrinthine realm filled with terrifying demons, lakes of fire, and gateways guarded by fearsome deities. The deceased, equipped with a copy of the Book of the Dead as their guide, was believed to use specific aromas as both a protective shield and a divine compass. Incense burners were sometimes placed in the tomb, and spells were recited that called upon the power of fragrance to repel the monstrous Apep, the serpent of chaos. The sweet smoke was a weapon of light against the forces of darkness. The ultimate goal was to reach the Hall of Judgment and stand before Osiris. Here, the final and most important olfactory test occurred. The deceased would have to recite the negative confession, denying having committed various sins, but it was believed that a pure soul would also smell a certain way specifically, that they would possess the sweet, clean scent of the lotus blossoms that grew in the celestial marshes of the afterlife. To smell of the divine lotus was proof of a life lived in accordance with Mat, a sensory certificate of purity that was as important as any spoken word. Conversely, a soul that had lived a wicked life was thought to carry the foul, putrid stench of decay and rot, immediately marking them as impure and unworthy before the scales of justice were even balanced. In the final reckoning, a lifetime of using sacred perfume culminated in this moment, the hope that one's very soul would be eternally fragrant, a passport to paradise written not on papyrus, but carried on the air itself. For centuries, the secrets of Egyptian perfume were known only through faded hieroglyphs and the silent, empty vessels left in tombs. The actual scents themselves were believed to be lost to time, evaporated into the air millennia ago. But today, a fascinating field known as archaeological chemistry is changing that, allowing us to literally breathe in the past. Scientists are now using tools like gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, to analyze the invisible residues left inside those ancient alabaster jars and tiny faience pots. These incredibly sensitive instruments can detect the molecular fingerprints of specific resins, oils, and plant waxes that have adhered to the pottery for thousands of years. It's a form of olfactory time travel. By identifying the chemical compounds, researchers can confirm what the written records only hint at. They've verified the presence of frankincense in funerary workshops, pinpointed the use of pistacia resin in embalming materials, and even identified the specific type of cedar oil favored by royal perfumers. This isn't just about confirming historical accounts. It's about recovering data that was never written down, giving us our first real whiff of the ingredients that defined an era. This chemical detective work is only one part of the puzzle. The next, even more thrilling step is experimental archaeology, the attempt to physically recreate these ancient scents using the same methods and materials. Perfumers and historians are partnering in a global effort to bring these recipes back to life. They study the temple reliefs at Edfu that list the 16 ingredients of Kaifai, then spend months grinding raisins, soaking juniper berries, and patiently combining them with turpentine resin and camel grass, all while following the ritual incantations and specific timings described in the text. The results are as varied as the interpreters, with each new batch offering a different theory on what that sacred twilight smoke might have actually smelled like. Some recreations are sweet and wine-like from the fermented fruit. Others are sharp and medicinal from the resins, but each attempt is a profound connection to the minds of the ancient perfumers. It's a hands-on history that moves beyond theory and into the senses, teaching us not just what they used, but how difficult it was to use it, revealing the immense skill and patience required to craft a single gram of sacred fragrance. This revival of ancient knowledge is powerfully influencing the world of modern high perfumery. A new wave of niche fragrance houses and master perfumers are looking to the Egyptians not for specific recipes, but for a philosophy of scent. They are embracing the idea of perfume as something sacred and transformative, rather than just a commercial accessory. Inspired by the Egyptian use of complex resins and animalic musks, these creators are crafting sophisticated, unisex fragrances that tell a story and evolve on the skin over many hours, much like the intricate temple blends would have unfolded in the smoky air. They are moving away from simple, fleeting floral notes and towards deep SMOKY Chinese litter, Jai-Dio base notes of labdanum, a modern stand-in for the lost Antiu resin, myrrh, and oud, seeking to create the same sense of depth and spiritual resonance that the Egyptians mastered. The connection is sometimes direct and breathtakingly personal. Imagine visiting a modern exhibition and being invited to lean in and smell a recreated ancient Egyptian perfume from a stone vessel. This exact experience was made possible by researchers who partnered with a perfumer to recreate a scent found in a 3,000-year-old workshop in Tel El Amarna, the city of the pharaoh Akhenaten. Based on their chemical analysis, they blended frankincense, myrrh, and pistacia to create a fragrance they named the Scent of Eternity. To smell it is to collapse time, to share a sensory experience with a people separated from us by centuries, yet connected through the universal language of aroma. It proves that these ancient techniques were not primitive, they were profoundly advanced, and their rediscovery is giving us a richer, more complete understanding of human history, one that we can finally, truly sense for ourselves. What we've uncovered is nothing short of a civilization that mastered fragrance on a level we are only beginning to fully appreciate. The ancient Egyptian perfumer was a singular figure, a fusion of priest, chemist, and artist who operated within a worldview where a beautiful scent was not a simple luxury, but a tangible thread connecting the human to the heavenly. They were scientists who pioneered distillation and enflourished centuries before the rest of the world, understanding the chemistry of solubility and preservation with an almost intuitive genius. Yet they were also theologians, viewing their work as a form of divine architecture, using sacred geometry and ritual to craft aromas that could resonate with the very frequency of the gods. This was a culture that didn't just make perfume, they prayed with it, healed with it, bargained with it, and even died with it, believing it was essential fuel for the soul's journey into eternity. The legacy of this sacred science is woven into the very fabric of our modern fragrance culture, often in ways we don't even realize. The very structure of a great perfume today, with its top, middle, and base notes, designed to unfold a story over time, echoes the Egyptians' complex, evolving blends like kaifi. Our continued fascination with rich, warm, animalic notes like musk and ambergris is a direct inheritance from their sophisticated palate. More profoundly, the entire concept of aromatherapy, of using scent to alter mood and promote well-being, finds its oldest and most articulate expression in the practices of Egyptian physicians. When a modern perfumer crafts a scent meant to evoke mystery, sanctity, or primal desire, they are walking a path first laid out along the Nile, in workshops where every ingredient was chosen for both its aroma and its soul. So we end our journey with a question for you, an invitation to become part of this ongoing conversation with history. If you could step into a temple garden at dawn, or an embalmer's tent at the height of the 70-day ritual, which one Egyptian scent would you most want to experience firsthand? Would it be the legendary, multi-layered smoke of sacred kaifi as it coils towards the temple's ceiling at dusk? The intoxicating, euphoria-inducing aroma of pure blue lotus absolute, the champagne of ancient perfumes? Or perhaps the profound, somber sanctity of the 7 sacred oils being applied to a mummy, sealing a soul for its eternal journey? Share your choice in the comments below. Let's explore which ancient aroma still calls to us across the centuries, a whispered secret waiting to be breathed in once more.